On the 4th of July, one day after her son got married at Madison Square Garden, Donna Kelce stood in the middle of New York City and tried to find words for what she had witnessed. She could not find many. A reporter asked what she could share about the wedding. Donna, who has never been at a loss for warmth, who fills rooms naturally, who has spent the last 3 years being one of the most publicly beloved mothers in America, looked at the camera and said the only sentence that was sufficient. "I really can't say a heck of a lot," she said, "except it was magical, man. Magical." She said the word twice. People who know Donna Kelce will understand why that was the whole answer. Not because of a legal agreement, not because of a management team's instructions, but because some things do not compress into sentences. Some things are too full. Some things, when you try to put them into words, lose the thing that made them what they were. And so you say magical twice, and you let the repetition carry what the language cannot. 12 days have passed since July 3rd. The photographs are still spreading. The details keep emerging. Guests sharing what they saw, what they heard, what they felt in that room. The internet is assembling the evening piece by piece, the way it always assembles things it was not invited to. A detail about the venue here, a story about the vows there. The confirmation that Travis Kelce cried more than Taylor Swift, which surprised everyone who has ever watched Taylor Swift perform in front of a stadium and assumed that composure under pressure was her default setting. It was not Taylor who cried more. It was Travis. To understand why Donna Kelce said magical twice and could not say more, you need to know what she was reliving when she said it. The guests who entered Madison Square Garden on July 3rd walked through a tunnel first. Not the arena's usual entrance, something different, something intentional. The walls of the tunnel were covered in photographs, childhood photographs, relationship photographs, the specific history of two people assembled into the particular order that says, "Here is how we became who we are, and here is how we found each other." People slowed down in that tunnel. People took their time. By the time they emerged into the venue itself, they were already inside the story. What they emerged into looked nothing like Madison Square Garden. Real trees, real ferns, white everywhere. The specific white of something living rather than something manufactured. A forest built inside an arena. A secret garden in the middle of Manhattan, on the 3rd of July, in a building that usually holds 22,000 people for basketball games and concerts. 1,000 people inside it that night, which is not a small number by any measure except the measure of what Madison Square Garden is built for. And yet, it felt intimate. Every person who has spoken about that evening has said the same thing. Intimate, personal, real. The reporters who described a venue that big feeling that small. The guests who called it a pinch-me moment. Glennon Doyle, who wrote that the night was somehow so big yet so small. The person who said they had never witnessed a happier bride or groom. They were not describing the flowers or the venue. They were describing what happened when Taylor Swift and Travis Kelce stood at the end of that aisle and opened their gold books and began to speak. The vows were 20 minutes each. This is not a standard duration. Standard wedding vows last 1 to 3 minutes. The couple had written something different. Something that required the kind of time you only give to something when you intend to say the whole thing rather than the summary of it. The guests had been provided with embroidered handkerchiefs when they arrived. This was not an accident. Taylor sang part of hers. Of course she did. She has spent her entire professional life finding the place where spoken language stops being sufficient and something else is required. She has written songs about heartbreak and joy and fear and love, with the specific understanding that some things need music to carry them. On July 3rd, in front of 1,000 people in a secret garden inside Madison Square Garden, she found the place where her vows needed to be sung, and she sang them. Travis had not known she would do that, but before the vows, there was the aisle. Taylor Swift walked down the aisle to a string arrangement of one of her own songs. Not a standard wedding processional, not something borrowed from anyone else's tradition. One of her own compositions, reimagined by strings, played in the specific quiet that falls over a room when 1,000 people simultaneously decide to stop breathing. Donna heard the first notes and recognized them immediately. She had heard Taylor play them in fragments, in kitchens, in the background of phone calls. Now they filled Madison Square Garden. Donna watched the doors. Travis was already standing at the altar. He had been there for what felt, to the guests who described it afterward, like both a very long time and no time at all. He had been described as nervous, which anyone who knows him would find slightly hard to believe and entirely understandable. And then the doors opened, and everyone in that room turned, and Travis looked down the aisle. And whatever nerves had been present until that moment left his face completely. He just looked at her. A guest who was seated close to the altar described his expression as the look of a man who has arrived somewhere he has been traveling toward his entire life and has just realized the traveling is over. He stood very still. She walked toward him. That was the whole of it in its simplest form. And the whole of it was everything. He stood at the altar and heard the woman he had just married begin to sing words she had written for him. And something happened to his face. A guest described it later as the look of a man who had completely forgotten, in the best possible way, what kind of person he was standing next to. He cried. Not in a contained, managed way. Not the single, dignified tear that gets photographed and captioned. He cried the way people cry when something they have been holding toward for a very long time finally arrives and the holding is over. You would think the bride would be the one crying more. It was Travis. Donna Kelce, sitting in the front row, watched this happen. She had been watching Travis navigate the world for 39 years. She had watched him be a boy in Cleveland Heights who took up too much space in every room he entered. She had watched him become a football player, and then a famous football player, and then something the culture decided it needed in a specific way that neither of them fully understood. She had watched him learn, slowly, and then all at once, how to be still, how to be present, how to stop performing himself and start being himself. She had watched all of it. And she had watched one other thing that nobody else in Madison Square Garden had seen. In December 2025, in a Kansas City kitchen, Travis Kelce had brought a notebook to the table. He had sat across from his mother, and he had read her the words he intended to say to Taylor Swift on the day they got married. He had read them once, clearly, without performance. When he finished, Donna had not spoken for a long time, and when she finally did, she said one sentence. She is going to love you for the rest of her life. On July 3, 2026, Donna sat in the front row of Madison Square Garden and listened to Travis read those same words from a gold book. She heard every sentence before it arrived. She had been keeping them for 7 months. She was the only person in that arena of 1,000 people who already knew what the next line was going to be. And when Travis reached the part that made him cry, the part that guests described as the moment the groom visibly broke, Donna knew exactly which line it was. She had heard it in a kitchen in December and had understood immediately what it was, what it would do, what it would mean when it was finally spoken out loud to the right person. She had been waiting 7 months to see if she was right. She was right. There was a specific moment in Taylor's vows that guests have described separately from everything else. It was the moment Taylor talked about the kind of person Travis was in high school. Not the athlete, not the future NFL star, not the name that would eventually appear on the back of jerseys across the country. The person. Taylor spoke about Travis Kelce sitting with students who were bullied or overlooked, the kids who ate alone, the kids who needed someone to choose them, at a time when he was already the most popular boy in the room and had every social reason not to. She had learned this about him. Someone had told her. And she had filed it in the specific place where she files the things that tell her who a person actually is underneath everything they have become. She spoke about it in front of 1,000 people. Travis, who was already emotional, heard the story of himself at 17 years old being described by the woman he had just married in front of everyone he had ever loved. And the particular thing that came over his face was not pride exactly. It was the expression of a man hearing himself recognized in a way that costs someone something to say. She had done the work of finding out who he was before the cameras. She was telling the room. He cried harder. The embroidered handkerchiefs that had been distributed to guests when they arrived proved, in that moment, to be not a charming detail, but a practical necessity. Taylor Swift became emotional when Travis promised to protect her forever. This has been reported. This is what the guests described. Travis Kelce, standing at an altar in the middle of a secret garden inside Madison Square Garden, making a promise with the specific gravity of a man who means exactly what he says, and Taylor Swift hearing it and feeling what it cost him to say it, and understanding, fully and completely, what it was being offered. This is what Donna was reliving on July 4th when she stood at the Macy's celebration and tried to find words. She had flown in from Orlando. She had watched her son get married. She had sat in the front row and known the words before they arrived, and watched the woman who heard them for the first time. She had watched Travis cry in front of 1,000 people and felt, somewhere in the specific place where mothers keep the things they have been hoping for, something settle into its final position. She thought about Lake Erie. She has said so herself. Standing in New York City on July 4th, thinking about the years when she used to take the boys down to Lake Erie to watch the fireworks. Euclid, Ohio. Travis and Jason, small, sitting on a blanket in the dark watching the sky. The particular childhood summers of the Midwest that you carry forever and pull out at the moments that feel circular, that feel like the same thing happening again at a different scale. The boy who watched fireworks at Lake Erie. The man who got married at Madison Square Garden and cried while his wife sang her vows. After the ceremony, Andrea Swift, Taylor's mother, led the guests into the reception room. A stage was set. Paul McCartney performed. Stevie Nicks performed. Adam Sandler, who had officiated the ceremony, performed an original song he had written for the couple. Outside Madison Square Garden, the streets of Manhattan were closed. The building's exterior screens illuminated the New York sky with 4 words: Just and T married. The T was deliberately capitalized, Taylor's signature. A joke and a declaration at once, visible from blocks away, on the 3rd of July in a city that was already gearing up for the next day's fireworks. Donna did not sleep much that night. She has not said this publicly, but you can imagine it. The way that nights like this one do not release you easily. The way a person who has been hoping for something for years, who has watched it arrive and lived inside it for an evening, carries it back to wherever they are sleeping and lies awake with the weight of it. Not from sadness, from fullness, from the particular kind of joy that is too large to fit inside a night's rest. The next morning, she was at the Macy's 4th of July celebration in Manhattan. Still in the city, still in the aftermath. The fireworks were that night over the Hudson. And Donna Kelce, who grew up watching fireworks at Lake Erie with 2 boys who are now grown men, one of whom got married the day before, stood in the middle of New York City and found the words that were available to her. Donna said magical twice and could not say more. That is not a failure of language. That is a mother who was in the front row when everything she had hoped for arrived, who had heard the words in December and waited 7 months and then sat in a secret garden inside an arena and watched her son mean every word of them, who watched Taylor Swift sing a piece of her vows to the man who had read Donna a notebook in a kitchen and been told, "She is going to love you for the rest of her life." She does. She married him on July 3rd. And Donna Kelce, who cannot say a heck of a lot except that it was magical, is still on cloud 9. 12 days later. She will be for a long time. Subscribe. More of these stories are coming, the ones that happen in front rows, where the people who knew the words first finally get to hear them said out loud.